time to discuss everything this time. So let's see. The performance timeline API is a thing, and it's generally great, but it's got one big glaring problem. And we've talked to a number of analytics providers to find out that, yes, this is a real problem people are facing. And that's the fact that their web pages are made of frames, and we don't allow basically anything to cross that frame boundary if it goes across origins. And this is obviously a good thing, right? The web privacy and security model depends on this. But it still means that it's a huge blind spot for this API. You can't know if, as an analytics provider, you can't know if some cross-origin frame is actually stalling, if it's failing to load, if it's causing a bad user experience, right? There's literally no way to tell this from the perspective of the top-level page. You can get around some of it with custom script, but the problem is that you need to have that script, you need to control the script on all of the frames in order to be able to do this. And it would be nice if you didn't have to do that, because there's a lot of embedded third-party frames that are embedded by a lot of different embedders, and having them run everybody's script all the time is likely impossible. So this is a possible way to improve this, to basically say, can we report performance timeline events from an embedded frame up to the main page if that child frame agrees? Obviously, some kind of opt-in and cooperation is going to be absolutely critical. And we do this in a standard way that doesn't require custom script on the child frame. So let's see. There is, can I switch to this doc here? Let me see. So I've got a doc that I shared. All right. That should have been attached to the agenda for this meeting here, which is just called a cross-frame performance timeline. Yes, I want to join this. And I would like to share this tab, please. So this might be too small to see, but this basically outlines the problem that I just talked about and proposes a solution to this, which, there we go. So yeah, so basically we say that the embedded site has to opt in. The opt-in on its own is sufficient to allow sharing. Right, you don't require any other script on the embedder. The embedding site has to explicitly request that it gets performance timeline entries from the child frames so that we don't break any existing deployments just by having a child frame opt in. And also you can distinguish those timeline events from subframes from the ones coming from your main page. What we'd like to do is basically have a header. The timing allow origin header already does this sort of thing for resources. We don't want to just extend that to frames because it has significantly different semantics here. But we could have something like a performance allow origin header, which would allow you to say, okay, well, what origins are allowed to request my timeline events? I'd like to avoid minting a new header and actually just make this a document policy configuration point. So we've already shipped document policy for a couple of things. This would basically add a new token to it. In this case, I've just called it share performance timeline with, and it would take a list of origins. So you could say either share my timeline with anybody, or just share it with these particular origins who I know and expect to be embedding me. And basically, once you do that, that should be enough. I'm going to skip past the things that we thought about and discarded, but anybody can go and take a look at these. There we go. So what we want to do is extend the performance observer methods to have an additional Boolean to say, please include frames. And if you say yes to this, then you will start getting performance timeline events from all of the child frames that have opted in. The non-observer methods would similarly have a Boolean like that attached to them. And then in the response, when you actually start getting these events, what I think the simplest way to do here, and this is certainly up for discussion, is basically just include in the JavaScript object a reference to the window object of the frame that was the source of the event. There's some talk here as well that we could provide like index down the frame tree level so that you could navigate to it, but I believe that the two are basically equivalent. And having a window means that you've basically got something that you could post message to if you want to do additional things to it without having to go search for that frame. Right, so we just add basically a source object to the performance entry IDL. And then the document ends with, here's an example of how you would actually use this in practice. Right, so the embedded page would have a share timeline with, giving the top level document. The top level would say, make me a new performance observer. By the way, I want to get child frame performance entries. And then once it starts getting those in its callback, it can look at the source and it can segment those, it can identify them, it can pinpoint where problems are, and report those. So that's the outline of that. If we want to stop the presentation, I guess we can discuss pros and cons and if this is a terrible idea or something that we should get to doing.